November 16th, 2007, Fort Collins, Colorado. A cold, clear Friday. Side streets dry. Traffic light. At 11:07 p.m., the door of Pine Crest Market swings open and Maya Jensen steps out. 22 years old, nursing student. Keys in her right hand, canvas tote on her shoulder, blue Nalgene tucked inside. She had just texted her roommate. Heading home. Needs sleep before clinicals. The store camera records her crossing the small pool of light by the entrance. She turns left toward the alley where employees park. Inside, the register tapes balance. Manager Luis Ortega signs the closeout sheet. Coworker Elena Ruiz remembers Maya saying she'd be up early. No mention of plans. No tension in her voice. Outside, the green Subaru Outback sits under a sodium lamp with its rear hatch dented and a faded hiking sticker on the glass. The route home is simple. East on Mulberry, south at LeMay, a jog towards City Park. 14 minutes with green lights. At 11:10, a delivery van's dash cam from the block over picks up a wagon's headlights turning east. The image is grainy, but the height and spread match a late 90s Outback. At 11:11, a doorbell camera 2 streets away records engine noise and a set of taillights moving past. No plates are legible. No horn. No erratic driving. Maya's phone stays active through the first stretch. At 11:17, it pings off a tower near Mulberry. At 11:19, the last activity hits a sector that overlaps the Cache la Poudre river corridor and the greenbelt lots north of Vine. After that, the line goes quiet. No outgoing call, no text. The voicemail greeting answers on the first ring for the rest of the night. Back at the house, the kitchen light is on. Her roommate waits up with a half-closed laptop. Midnight passes. A message goes out. You home? The status shows not delivered. The roommate watches the driveway through the blinds and tells herself Maya might be grabbing food or stopping for gas. By 1 a.m., the worry feels different. By 2 o'clock, it is the only thing in the room. By late morning, the Subaru is not in any lot they check. Tow operators deny any overnight pulls. Hospitals report no Jane Doe with Maya's description. The last solid fact remains the simplest one. She left work at 11:07 and started a short drive she knew by heart. This is where the case opens. An ordinary end of shift, a reliable route, a phone that stops talking near the river. No storm to blame, no witness to a crash, no quick answer waiting at the end of a street. Only a gap wide enough for a life to disappear, and a city that will spend years trying to measure what happened in those 12 minutes. Maya Jensen was 22 years old when her life was cut short. She was a nursing student in her junior year at Colorado State University, already planning to specialize in pediatrics. She wasn't waiting to finish her degree before helping others. On weekends, she volunteered at the Thompson Valley Free Clinic, where patients and staff alike remembered her as dependable and precise. She was born and raised in Loveland, Colorado, just south of Fort Collins. The oldest of 3 siblings, she carried responsibility from an early age. Her younger brother and sister looked up to her, and her parents leaned on her reliability. Staying close to home for college wasn't just about money. It was also about family. Maya loved the outdoors. Trail running, climbing routes at Horsetooth Reservoir, long hikes that started at dawn. She was safety conscious. She carried pepper spray on her keyring after a campus safety seminar, a small detail that showed she thought ahead. Her car was just as practical. A green 1998 Subaru Outback with a dented hatch and hiking stickers on the glass. It wasn't much to look at, but it took her everywhere. At the time she vanished, she lived with 2 roommates in a small rental near City Park. Friends described her as organized, the kind of person who wrote everything down in a color-coded planner. She stuck to her schedule: study groups, shifts at the convenience store, tutoring sessions. Nothing in her routine suggested unpredictability. Her social life was modest. She didn't use drugs, and she only drank lightly, usually a beer or two. One of the last people to see Maya alive was her friend and co-worker, Helena Ruiz. They worked the same shift at Pine Crest Market the night Maya disappeared. Helena clocked out first and said Maya seemed normal, focused on getting home. There was no argument, no strange behavior, nothing that suggested she was walking into danger. Money was tight. Tuition bills pressed against her savings, and she picked up every shift she could. She often drove the Subaru across town late at night, balancing work and school. Friends admired her discipline, but also noticed her tendency to overtrust people. She lent out gear, shared her notes, and gave rides without hesitation. It made her well-liked, but it also made her vulnerable. Those closest to Maya all repeated the same message when she vanished. She wasn't the type to disappear. She didn't leave home without a word. She didn't abandon school or family. She didn't live a double life. She was exactly what she appeared to be: a hard-working, organized young woman, staying on track toward her degree. That is why her disappearance was so alarming. It clashed with everything known about her. She was steady, reliable, and rooted in daily routines. When she didn't come home that night, when her Subaru failed to appear in the driveway, alarm bells rang instantly. The absence of warning signs gave her case weight. It stripped away the easy explanations. There was no secret life to uncover, no hidden trouble to blame. Maya was simply gone, and that fact alone convinced her family and her friends that something serious had happened. Her story became a reminder to everyone in Fort Collins. If someone like Maya could vanish on a short drive home, then safety could not be taken for granted. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't careless. Yet she disappeared all the same. And because her life was built on routine and dependability, her disappearance didn't just cause fear. It forced everyone to realize that this was not a choice. Something had gone wrong, and someone had taken her away. At 2:15 p.m. on November 16, 2007, Maya Jensen wrapped up her afternoon class at Colorado State University. She gathered her notes. At 9:03 p.m., a brief confrontation caught attention. A man grew frustrated when his credit card was declined. He argued, raising his voice. Maya stayed professional, but the exchange left an impression on both staff and customers. That man was later identified as Evan Hart. He had a record for petty theft and an unstable reputation. Detectives would circle back to him quickly. At 10:41 p.m., during her break, Maya stepped into the back room and took a short phone call. Records later showed it lasted 48 seconds. The number wasn't saved in her contacts. Investigators would later struggle to identify the caller, and that gap became one of the most important pieces of the case. By 11:02 p.m., the store was closing. Registers balanced. Luis Ortega signed the paperwork. There were no shortages, no errors. At 11:07 p.m., the store's security camera caught Maya leaving for the night. She carried her reusable tote, her blue Nalgene bottle in hand. She appeared calm, alone, and heading toward the lot where her Subaru was parked. 4 minutes later, at 11:11 p.m., a residential security camera 2 blocks away captured the headlights of a green wagon turning east. The image was grainy, blurred by glare. but investigators later believed the size and shape matched Maya's Subaru Outback. The plate couldn't be read. It was the last potential visual of her car in motion. Between 11:17 and 11:19 p.m., Maya's phone sent its final signals. The pings came from towers along Mulberry, then LeMay, then Vine. The last activity registered near the Cache la Poudre River corridor, a low-traffic area lined with industrial lots and stretches of dark green belt. Then the phone went silent. No more calls. No more texts. Back at the rental house near City Park, her roommate waited. Midnight came and went. A message was sent. "You home?" The status returned instantly. Not delivered. At 1 a.m., she looked through the blinds again. The driveway was still empty. Maya's Subaru never appeared. By 7:15 a.m., with no word, the roommate... This timeline gave investigators their first framework. Maya left school, went to work, and finished her shift as expected. She left on time, drove the route she always drove, and then disappeared in the short stretch between the store and her home. The day ended with no crash, no hospital record, and no car found. For the police, those final hours became the critical window. Within them was the answer to how Maya Jensen vanished. The investigation into Maya Jensen's disappearance began quickly, but the progress slowed almost as fast. Police classified it as an endangered missing adult case, a serious designation that acknowledged the risk of harm. The first step was obvious. Start from the last confirmed location, Pine Crest Market. Detectives pulled the in-store footage, which showed Maya leaving at 11:07 p.m. with her tote and water bottle in hand. That tape was preserved, but a liquor store 2 doors down also had cameras facing the street. By the time police requested those recordings, the system had already looped and taped over itself after 72 hours. Whatever it might have shown was gone. From there, officers drove the roads Maya should have taken home. They checked shoulders, medians, and guardrails along Mulberry, LeMay, and Vine. They expected to find skid marks, broken glass, plastic debris, anything to suggest a crash or forced stop. Nothing turned up. The pavement was clean. The guardrails were intact. There was no sign of her Subaru leaving the roadway. Search teams shifted focus to the Cache la Poudre River corridor, the last area where Maya's phone signaled. Volunteers and officers walked the banks. Winter water levels were low, but visibility in the current was poor. Divers tested select sections, but without strong leads, coverage was limited. No vehicle was found. No evidence surfaced. Attention turned quickly to people in her circle. Detectives interviewed her ex-boyfriend, Jordan Pike. Cases like this often begin with the former partner. Jordan admitted he and Maya had been in contact earlier that year, but insisted there was no recent conflict. He produced Then there was the phone call. At 10:41 p.m., Maya stepped into the break room and took a 48-second call from an unknown number. Detectives flagged it as critical. But in 2007, phone records were not instantly accessible. Carriers still relied on paper-based archives and slower retrieval processes. Weeks passed before partial logs trickled in, and by then, valuable time had been lost. The unknown caller remained unidentified, and investigators couldn't confirm who reached her or why. That gap would haunt the case for years. A separate tip came in from a local resident. He noticed unusual tire ruts near a private irrigation pond off North Timberline Road, not far from the Greenbelt corridor. The pond was icy, access was restricted, and liability concerns slowed approval for a search. By the time officers returned, the tracks had faded. Whatever had caused them was no longer clear. The pond was never prioritized again. As weeks stretched into months, frustration grew. By spring of 2008, the investigation stood still. There was no Subaru, no crime scene, no sign of a struggle. Witness canvases yielded nothing concrete. Leads thinned out. The investigation fell back on the same names: Jordan, Cole, the unknown caller. But none of them broke the case open. In 2009, resources shifted to new cases. The Jensen file lost momentum. Detectives admitted privately that without a car, without a body, and without new witness statements, there was nowhere left to go. By 2010, the case was officially transferred to the cold case unit. The decision devastated Maya's family. To them, the investigation was far from over. They continued to press for answers, calling in tips, organizing searches, and keeping Maya's story alive in the community. But for the police, the file now sat on a shelf. The years between 2007 and 2010 would later be remembered as a period of missed chances. The liquor store footage lost. The 48-second call left unresolved. The pond tracks deprioritized. Each detail might have offered direction, but each one slipped away. The central question remained. Did investigators focus too tightly on the ex-boyfriend while overlooking other leads? When police moved Maya Jensen's file into the cold case cabinet in 2010, her family refused to accept it. For them, it was not closure. It was abandonment. From that moment on, Diane and Mark Jensen carried the investigation themselves. They bought maps of Larimer County and spread them across their dining room table. They circled every pond, irrigation ditch, and boat launch within 30 miles of Fort Collins. They marked them with color-coded pins, a system only they could fully read. Each weekend, they drove out with notebooks in hand. They stopped at farms, feedlots, and trailheads. They asked questions, wrote down names, and added arrows to their maps. They became their own search team. Every November, the family returned to campus for a candlelight vigil. Students and neighbors stood in silence outside CSU's nursing school. They lit candles, raised photos of Maya, and spoke her name aloud so she would not be forgotten. Local TV crews covered the gatherings. Each year the same message: she was still missing, and someone out there knew why. Diane built a website, findmayajensen.org. It wasn't polished, but it contained what mattered: a full timeline of her daughter's last day, maps of search areas, still frames from the store camera, and a hotline number. As social media grew, links to the site spread to Facebook groups and online forums. True crime communities began sharing the case, calling for answers, and asking how a young woman and her Subaru could vanish in a city of over 100,000 people. Mark, more private than his wife, turned his energy toward the water. He emailed hobby sonar teams across the country, fishermen, boaters, and volunteer divers who posted on forums. Most messages went unanswered. Some responded but quoted costs the family could not afford. Professional recovery teams charged thousands per day. The Jensens didn't have it. Still, Mark kept writing, hoping someone would eventually say yes. Meanwhile, Maya's younger sister Hannah stepped forward. She was still in high school when Maya disappeared. By college, she was speaking publicly at campus safety events. Standing at a podium, she repeated a single line that became her family's. Volunteers joined in. Community groups organized searches of reservoirs and backwoods ponds. They hauled out bicycles, tires, and shopping carts. They used magnets, rakes, and small boats, But each time, the water gave back junk, never the green Subaru that mattered. As the years passed, rumors grew. Some said Maya had a secret boyfriend. Others whispered about drugs. None of it was true. The Jensens spent hours disproving every claim, presenting evidence that their daughter lived clean and straightforward. Each false rumor only made their work harder, distracting from the real search. In 2016, the family pushed into digital space. A Facebook group called Find Maya Jensen quickly gathered thousands of followers. Old classmates posted memories. Locals shared sightings that had never been reported. Journalists picked the story back up, running features in Colorado newspapers. Podcasts dedicated to unsolved crimes invited the Jensens to tell their story. In every appearance, the family repeated the same line: "We only need one right tip." The calls and emails kept coming, but none of them broke the case. Some were hoaxes. Some were confused memories. Some were dead ends. Still, the attention mattered. It kept Maya's name alive. It reminded people she hadn't come home. By 2019, 12 years had passed. The Jensens were exhausted but unrelenting. Their website was still live. Their Facebook group was still active. Vigils still burned candles in the November cold. They still drove the back roads, checking ponds with binoculars. They still waited for someone to finally listen to the tip that would matter. The family's war wasn't about resources or authority. It was about persistence. While police closed the file and moved on, Diane, Mark, and Hannah refused. They created their own record. They built their own search. They carried the case on their shoulders for more than a decade. And in the end, it was their persistence, their refusal to stop, that made sure when the right team, the right tools, and the right moment came along, Maya's story wasn't buried under dust. In 2022, the Sonar crew hauled their small boat onto the water. They lowered side scan equipment into the pond. As the boat cut slow lines across the surface, images began to form on the monitor. Dark shapes, mud, and then a rectangle, clear edges. The dimensions lined up with a mid-size wagon, the room inside the cabin, the flat rear hatch. A drone marked the coordinates overhead. The county gave approval for a controlled search. Deputies stood by on the banks as the divers suited up. The water was near black, filled with silt and farm runoff. Visibility dropped 2 inches the moment a hand went under. One diver moved along the pond floor, sweeping methodically. He found a hard line, traced it with his glove. Metal. A frame. The outline of a vehicle almost sealed into the mud. His hand slid toward the rear, and he felt a lens. Oval, with ridges, the exact shape of Subaru taillights from the late 1990s. The team surfaced and relayed the news. They had found a car. Straps were secured to the frame. A wrecker truck backed toward the bank, cable stretching taut across the water. The winch engaged, the pond rippled, mud rising in thick clouds. Bubbles broke the surface. Then a shadow lifted. Metal scraped. Slowly a green wagon emerged, its body coated in algae, windows blown out, tires shredded to the rims. The crowd on the bank grew silent. The Subaru came into full view, half crushed but unmistakable. Green paint, stickers still faintly clinging to the rear hatch, the dent still visible. Inside, investigators found human remains in the driver's seat. Skeletal, collapsed, but still identifiable as a seated position. But it wasn't closure. It was the beginning of something darker. The Outback showed no signs of a crash. The airbags had not deployed. The gear shift was not in park. The driver's window was rolled halfway down. Details that hinted this was no accident. The discovery forced detectives back to square one. Who had lured Maya from her route home? Who had access to her car? And why had the lead at this very pond been ignored all those years ago? The car's recovery was not just a shocking find. It was the trigger that reopened the investigation and set the stage for the forensic breakthroughs that would finally expose Maya's killer. The Subaru came out of the pond in 2022. The evidence came out of it piece by piece. What it showed was simple and devastating. Maya Jensen did not crash. Someone put her car in the water and walked away. Forensics began at the medical examiner's lab. The remains were fragile after years underwater, but the injuries told a clear story. A blunt force strike to the left parietal bone. The fracture pattern ran short and sharp, with no matching trauma to the face or chest. That is not how drivers die in low-speed water entries. In real accidents, seatbelts restrain, airbags deploy, and fractures follow a predictable path. Here, the skull injury stood alone. The conclusion was firm: assault before submersion. The vehicle told the same story. Technicians documented the interior before a single seat was moved. The ignition was still in the on position. The gear selector sat in neutral. The driver's window was rolled halfway down. The airbags had not deployed. That combination matters. A driver who loses control at road speed hits the water hard enough to trigger airbag sensors, or at least leaves the shifter in drive or park when the engine dies. A half-down window suggests someone needed a quick exit, or wanted to minimize bubbles while pushing. It read like staging. They lifted the Outback's plastic trim and center console and worked every surface. Latent print specialists used small particle reagent and vacuum metal deposition, methods that can reveal ridge detail even after immersion. On the shifter bezel and the seatbelt latch, they developed. While the lab worked, detectives went backward in time. They revisited the 48-second phone call Maya took in the store break room at 10:41 p.m. on November 16, 2007. In the first investigation, carriers had produced partial records slowly. Now, with new legal requests and better tools, analysts pulled legacy logs from archival servers and microfilmed billing. They isolated the incoming number and traced it to a prepaid burner. The purchase had been made in cash at Foothills Mart, 2 blocks from Pine Crest Market, less than 30 minutes before Maya walked out of the store for the last time. That detail changed the frame. The call was not random. Someone had created a phone meant to disappear, used it to reach Maya, and likely used a pretext to get her attention. A card dispute, a return, a question about the register. It fit the short call length. It fit the timing. Detectives then went hunting for a paper trail. Foothills Mart did not keep digital footage from 2007, but it did retain cashier tapes with still camera captures tied to receipts, a clumsy but common system of the time. In storage, they found the strip for 10:34 p.m. The receipt listed a gift card and a prepaid SIM, both paid in cash. The attached still showed a silver Toyota Tacoma with a ladder rack easing past the window in the background. The plate was partially visible, not enough to run cleanly, but the make, color, and rack were clear. The next step was about familiarity. Who knew Maya's closing time? Who could craft a believable reason to call her back or pull her aside? Detectives requested the 2007 staff roster from Pine Crest, and a list of vehicles employees had registered with the store back then. One match jumped off the page. A silver Tacoma with a contractor-style ladder rack, registered to Evan Hart. Evan was the assistant manager in 2007. He had keys to the back door. He handled cash drops. He wrote parts of the weekly schedule. He was also the cousin of Cole Hart, the angry customer who fought with Maya over a declined card at 9:03 p.m. the same night. The circle tightened. Investigators compared Evan's philosophical shifts against the week Maya disappeared. He had filled in twice. Evidence that had looked circumstantial now linked together. The autopsy ruled out accident. The car's settings proved staging. The phone records showed planning with a burner purchased minutes before the call. The still image added the silver Tacoma. The staff roster put that Tacoma under an assistant manager with keys and knowledge of closing routines. The biology and prints placed that assistant manager inside Maya's car. Detectives rebuilt the likely sequence. At 10:34 p.m., someone bought a prepaid SIM and gift card at Foothills Mart. At 10:41 p.m., Maya took a 48-second call in the break room. The content is unknown, but the timing suggests a simple hook. There's an issue with a transaction. Can you step out to check something? Or meet by the side lot. At 11:07 p.m., she left the store on camera. Her phone then traveled east, pinging along Mulberry, LeMay, and Vine until 11:19 p.m., near the Greenbelt. Her Subaru ended up in the irrigation pond off North Timberline, the very pond neighbors had flagged in 2007. Forensics filled the gaps inside the car. If someone slides into the driver's seat to move the vehicle, his hand hits the shifter. If he reaches across Maya to pull the belt or secure her, his fingers touch the latch. If he smokes under stress while staging the scene, the butt can fall and lodge by the console. The lab's findings lined up with those motions. The defense later argued that water contaminates everything. Experts explained why that was not true here. Protected areas of the interior preserve prints and DNA. The cigarette butt's paper wrapping shields cells. A half-down window maintains a pocketed environment. Chain of custody was tight from the pond to the lab. The methods were standard. The profiles were reproducible. Detectives also checked Evan's movements in the days after the disappearance. Employment records showed no sudden absence. Bank activity looked ordinary. But his Tacoma matched the still. His job gave him access and the cover to be near the store without raising alarm. His family tie to Cole Hart added context. Cole had made himself known at 9:03 p.m. with a loud scene. Evan had the position to follow up on a supposed card issue an hour later. Together, those facts suggested coordination or, at minimum, an opportunity seized by someone who knew the system from the inside. Witnesses were re-interviewed. Co-workers remembered Evan's presence that week, his keys on a belt loop, his habit of checking registers after close. One recalled he sometimes smoked near the loading area even though company policy banned it. Another remembered the silver Tacoma with the rack because it was hard to miss in a small lot. None of them had connected those details to Maya at the time. In 2007, they were routine. In 2022, they were pieces of a plan. With the forensic picture complete, the case shifted from suspicion to proof. The strike to the skull explained why there was no fight recorded outside the store and no damage consistent with a collision. The ignition left on, the neutral gear, and the half-down window explained how the Subaru slipped into water without driver input. The burner purchase tied to the call explained why Maya left when she did. The cigarette and touch DNA explained who staged the car. Every answer pointed to the same person. The breakthrough did not end the story. It started the next chapter. Detectives drafted affidavits, laid out the evidence in sequence, and moved for warrants. The inner circle had finally narrowed to one name. And for the first time since 2007, the case against Maya's killer was grounded not in theory, but in hard, connected facts that would hold up in court. In 2023, after nearly 2 decades of silence, the case against Evan Hart finally broke open. A routine traffic stop changed everything. Officers pulled him over for a minor violation, but he was already on their radar. The prosecution's theory was straightforward. Investigators believed Evan used a burner phone to lure Maya. The pretext was simple, connected to the earlier incident with his cousin, Cole Hart, the card dispute. The burner call, only 48 seconds long, came from a phone purchased with cash at Foothills Mart, just blocks from Pine Crest Market. Records showed the purchase happened less than half an hour before Maya's shift ended. The prosecution argued this was not coincidence. Evan had planned it. According to their case, Maya answered the call and was asked to meet briefly outside. The theory was that Evan confronted her, struck her with blunt force, and forced her into a staged scenario. He set the Subaru's ignition to on, shifted the gear to neutral, rolled down the driver's side window halfway, and left the airbags undeployed. Then, he released the car down the incline into the irrigation pond off North Timberline Road. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. A cover-up, staged to look like a late-night accident. The motive came from a mix of entitlement and opportunity. At Pine Crest, there had been whispers of money skimming and petty theft. Evan had access to the back office, keys to the building, and knowledge of closing times. He knew Maya's schedule. He knew her habits. Prosecutors argued that when she crossed his path that night, he saw a chance to eliminate a problem. The defense pushed back hard. They claimed the DNA was compromised by 18 years underwater. They argued the cigarette could have been left behind through secondary transfer, maybe even tossed inside after the car was raised. They suggested fingerprints on shared workplace surfaces could easily migrate. And they tried to paint the possibility of consensual contact. Maya and Evan in the same break room, DNA exchanged in ordinary ways. Without a confession, they argued, there was no certainty. But the state's case was built on layers, not one piece alone. Forensic experts ruled out any accident. They pointed to the blunt force trauma on Maya's skull. It wasn't consistent with a crash. They showed how the airbags never deployed. They explained the phone records strengthened the timeline. The 48-second call was traced back to the burner. Carrier archives and even microfilm billing led investigators to a single cash transaction at Foothills Mart. That same night, just minutes before the call, a man bought a SIM card and a prepaid gift card. Security still images showed a silver Toyota Tacoma with a ladder rack parked outside. The partial plate linked to Evan Hart. Cross-referencing employee vehicle records from 2007 confirmed the match. During trial, the jury saw it all. They were shown the Sonar recovery video of Maya's Subaru rising out of the pond. They saw the CSU lanyard draped inside, the blue Nalgene bottle that matched store footage, the waterlogged remains of a young woman who vanished without a trace 18 years earlier. The visuals carried weight. Prosecutors then walked the jury through the route maps and the ping data from Maya's phone, each step of her final minutes reconstructed. Leaving the store, driving east, signal dropping near the Cache la Poudre River, then silence. Expert witnesses followed. Forensic pathologists described the head injury. Crash reconstruction experts explained how airbags worked, how the car's gear position proved staging. DNA analysts described preservation techniques, chain of custody, and why the water did not erase the profiles. Each testimony added another layer of clarity. The most powerful moment came when prosecutors synced the timeline. The burner phone purchase at 10:34 p.m. The call at 10:41. Maya leaving the store at 11:07. Her phone cutting off at 11:19. The sequence left little room for chance. It showed planning, opportunity, and execution. The defense cross-examined aggressively. They raised doubts about chain of custody. They asked whether the cigarette could have been contaminated. They tried to discredit Sonar and recovery video as sensational. But each point was answered, and the weight of evidence held. After closing arguments, the jury retired. Deliberations lasted less than a single day. In 2024, the verdict was read aloud. The case left lasting lessons. It showed the danger of dismissing small details, like a single phone call or a minor workplace connection. It showed how overlooked evidence, like a car underwater, could hold the answer all along. And it showed the importance of persistence, both from families and from investigators willing to reopen a file. The trial's end closed the legal story, but it also opened a larger question. What detail sealed the case? Was it the burner call that lured her outside? Was it the DNA on the cigarette, indisputable in its match? Or was it the staged neutral gear that proved intent? For those following the case, the answer may differ, but together these details told a story that could no longer be denied. Evan Hart had taken Maya Jensen's life. Justice had finally arrived, though far too late. Maya Jensen's case left marks far beyond her family. It reshaped how Fort Collins thought about safety, community, and the limits of investigation. For years, people assumed the city was safe enough, that short commutes home from late shifts carried little danger. Her disappearance shattered that belief. Suddenly, even a familiar route, 14 minutes from store to apartment, felt uncertain. Neighbors pushed for better street lighting along corridors where students and workers walked home at night. Community boards pressed the city to review transit routes to make late-night travel less vulnerable. The first and most painful lesson came from the water itself. For 18 years, Maya's car sat in a pond less than 3 miles from where she was last seen. It proved that submerged vehicles aren't always freak accidents. They can be crime scenes hiding in plain sight. In Maya's case, that pond was reported early on. Tire ruts were noticed, but the lead slipped away because of liability worries and frozen water. By the time investigators returned, it was too late. The Subaru had become invisible. That mistake cost nearly 2 decades. The second lesson was about time. Cameras in neighboring businesses were on 72-hour loops. Phone records in 2007 moved at paper speed. By the time subpoenas went through, tapes had been overwritten, and the critical call that lasted 48 seconds was no longer traceable. Every delay closed a door. What could have been a solvable case in 2007 became 18 years of unanswered questions. The third lesson was about proximity. Investigators often overlook people who share workplace routines. But people with keys, access to back doors, and knowledge of closing times are not harmless background figures. They are risks. In Maya's case, the killer stood only steps away. Someone who knew the store, who knew her habits, and who used that knowledge to set a trap. Technology changed everything. Rocky Mountain Sonar, a small group of volunteers with side-scan sonar did what full agencies had failed to do. They pulled up a vehicle that had been waiting under the water since the night Maya vanished. What started as a YouTube channel grew into a search tool powerful enough to challenge official limits. This wasn't entertainment. It was investigation, fueled by persistence and community attention. It showed that families and volunteers, armed with affordable equipment and determination, could push cases forward in ways no one expected. For the Jensens, those 18 years were war. Diane and Mark Jensen refused to let their daughter's name fade into a file marked cold. They mapped every pond, every canal, every boat launch in a 30-mile radius. They searched themselves. They handed out flyers year after year. They stood in front of cameras. Institutional changes followed. Colorado agencies began reevaluating how they managed cold cases, especially when it came to preserving evidence indefinitely. National training modules started citing Maya's case as a warning against tunnel vision. The overlooked pond, the delayed phone records, the lost camera loops. These became examples of how not to run an investigation. Campuses like CSU also took note. Night shift students became a focus for safety reviews. Shuttle programs, escort services, and longer retention for surveillance footage were discussed as direct results of cases like Maya's. Her memory didn't stay in files and courtrooms. Every November, candles are lit at CSU. Nursing students in white coats gather, holding photos and saying her name aloud. At City Park Pavilion, community members meet under the same roof where vigils were held during the years of waiting. Now, those gatherings feel different. They aren't just about searching. They're about remembrance, about making sure the story is carried forward. A scholarship in Maya's name now helps first-generation nursing students who take on the same burdens she once carried: school, work, and late shifts. It transforms a personal tragedy into a form of opportunity for others. It keeps her name alive not only as a victim, but as part of the future of nursing in Colorado. The case left one final reflection. Justice did come, but it came far too slowly. Families cannot be expected to wait 18 years for answers. Investigators cannot afford to lose leads to paperwork delays or to dismiss a pond because of frozen water. Maya's case stands as a warning. Truth can surface, but it must surface sooner. Her story now carries 3 messages. For investigators, act fast and don't let evidence slip through cracks in the system. For families, persistence matters even when years drag on. For communities, safety must be proactive, not reactive. Maya Jensen's disappearance began as another missing person report. It ended as a lesson written across courtrooms, classrooms,